Morena has challenged Borkson to a card game that may very well decide the fate of the Black Whale 1. And in this video, we're going to go over the rules, the restrictions, the whys, the hows, and the most unpleasant possible outcome of this delightful game. I love card games. Togashi loves card games. So much so that in 2001, there was a Hunter x Hunter game released on the PS2 called Hunter x Hunter Altar of the Dragon Vein. And for this game, Togashi designed a card hunter named Ogiyu, which is just Yu-Gi-Oh! Out of order. And his general aesthetic is very Yu-Gi inspired, to say the least. But the last time that Togashi put so much focus on a simple game, it was Gungi, and that went on to foreshadow the end of the Chimera Ant arc. So let's take a bit of time to examine this ability. While it is possible that Morena has multiple Hatsu, both Contagion and this card game could come under the umbrella of the same sort of ability. Much like how Killua has his Godspeed ability, but it comes with two functions, Whirlwind and Speed of Lightning. Both quite different abilities that utilize the same basic framework. So perhaps Morena follows that, and her ability is more of an overall game conjuring Hatsu. As long as she follows a very specific set of rules, she can bring any game she wants into existence. But also other things, because we should ask whether or not Contagion actually originates from Morena in the first place. Could Morena have been infected by someone else? And could she have been a player in a previous Contagion game, reached 100 levels, transformed into a member 0, and has now started her own game? At first I thought probably not, because Morena's game specifies Kakin princes as targets, but the explanation of Contagion says that a member 0 can form their own infected community, meaning that they can potentially alter the rules within their own community. Morena is currently a level 45, but after becoming a member 0, is that more like starting New Game Plus? We just re-level from 0? Also, I guess that nothing has ever clarified that Contagion is Morena's ability. Even the explanation just said ability name. At the moment, I'm really liking the idea of Morena being a more general game master though. However, I should always say that the most straightforward explanation is that the card game is a second Hatsu that developed after Morena gained 20 levels within Contagion, and there is the potential that we'll find out rather easily by selecting a certain card in this game. But first, let's clear something up about the roles in this game. In the Togashi's Troop translation, the roles in the game are referred to as parent and child. Morena is the parent and Borkson is the child. However, in the official translation, the roles were defined as dealer and player, and this is because both are technically correct. In Japanese, the term for dealer is oya, meaning parent, and the term for player is ko, meaning child. So this is a case where the official translation is 100% correct, but it is one of those, I guess, unfortunate puns that doesn't really translate well into English. The parent-child dynamic is important to keep in mind because that's also how mafia factions in Japan function. When you join a Yakuza group, you partake in a Sakazuki ceremony where you form a symbolic parent-child relationship between the Yakuza recruit and their superior, which is what's currently being negotiated here. Morena wants Borkson to pledge her loyalty to the Heoli and become her child. And if you're a One Piece fan, then you've seen this ceremony happen with the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, except they pledged to become Luffy's sons without Luffy returning that pledge as a parent because it would, quote, cramp his style. But the general principle is important, because this negotiation game appears to be a Sakazuki ritual, a very roundabout Sakazuki ritual. And it's important to keep the parent-child dynamic in mind even if dealer and player is also correct. The framing of this, of course, puts the child at a bit of a thematic disadvantage. Children are generally guided by parents at best and submit to authority at worst. So the idea of the game is almost symbolic of a parent's attempt to humor their child through negotiation, offering compromises that don't necessarily affect the outcome, but make the child think that they've achieved something, which doesn't bode well for Borkson, because even after establishing that Morena will not cheat, Borkson still acknowledges that Morena is in complete control. Now, a lot of people have taken this to mean that Morena is still somehow cheating, but I personally do not think that's the case. Until proven otherwise, I think that Morena is just confident in either her ability to win the game with tactics alone, or confident that she'll be able to convince Borkson to submit to her cause willingly. So onto the game itself. This is a very simple and very portable game that gets played with only 12 cards. And we should thank Togashi for this because the options are complex enough with just those 12. 7 of these cards are placed on Morena's side of the board face up, and 5 of the cards are placed on Borkson's side face down. Borkson's cards are also shuffled so that neither Morena nor Borkson theoretically know what they are, and the game plays as follows. On turn 1, the child, Borkson, selects a card on the parent side of the board. Morena then fulfills the requirements of the selected card, after which point it goes to the graveyard and cannot be selected again. Then it becomes Morena's turn to select a face down card on Borkson's side of the board to be discarded, with the game ending once Borkson only has 1 card remaining, which becomes her answer to Morena's request. Those are the standard rules anyway. I say that because we've already had a big change to that, which is that Borkson negotiated that she would be the one to pick which of her cards gets discarded, the idea being to prevent Morena cheating, which Morena agreed to provided that she was able to shuffle them, thus preventing Borkson from cheating. To go over Boxen's cards, two of them are very simple yes and no cards. This should be fairly straightforward. We all know what yes and no mean. But if Boxen is left with either one of these, then her answer to Morena's request has to be either yes or no, depending on the one it is she's left with. But things they get a bit spicier from there, because Boxen also has a joker which allows her to choose either yes or no. Although it has been noted that the joker is more of an illusion of choice because it still forces an answer, and in fact if Boxen refuses to play the game, then the condition imposed on her is that she can only answer Morena's request with a yes or a no. So let's say we don't want to play the card game. Boxen says, nah mate. In that case she would effectively end up with the joker option, implying that the joker is a pretty undesirable result, because if it wasn't, then why play the game at all? In my opinion, the best card that Boxen has is the R card, or the return card. If this is Boxen's final card, then it allows her to bring back any of her response cards from the graveyard, meaning that she would have a full range of choice available to her. However, this card is only good because of the final option in the child's deck, which is the X card, meaning neither yes nor no. It allows Boxen to not give an answer to the request at all and void the game completely, with Morena promising that should this happen, they will not seek to renegotiate with Boxen. Morena also states that Boxen will be able to, quote, walk out of here without saying yes or no, but it's unknown as to whether or not the Haley family would just let Boxen leave, or if it's a technicality like, sure, you can walk out of here, but waiting outside is someone to kill you. Either way, Boxen's best case scenario would be to get down to the final two response cards and have them be both return and X. If she ends up with anything else in the final two cards, then there's a 50% chance that she will be locked into an answer. However, according to maths, there's only a 10% chance of both return and X will be left in the final two, which isn't amazing. But then again, it's all dependent on the information that Boxen discovers during the game. Boxen may discover that not giving an answer may not necessarily be the best way forward. There's a lot of negatives in that sentence. I get, you understand, right? Because I'm not saying it again. Because we need to go over the parent deck. The first card is Aim, and if Boxen selects this during her turn, then Morena will explain her goals, specifically in what she's trying to do by recruiting Boxen. Although if this card is selected, then Boxen is allowed to ask an unlimited amount of follow-up questions, so long as they pertain to Morena's goal. Now, we savvy manga readers already know basically what this goal is. Morena wants to destroy what she refers to as this dung heap of a world. It's fairly straightforward, but the way in which she wishes to go about this is not. There's a level of complexity to her motivations, and I feel like selecting Aim could provide us with some great clarity. And if I were Boxen, I'd find it very difficult not to select this card first, or one of the first, because it gives you the much needed context of why you, Boxen, are here and what Morena wants you to do. However, the second parent card is Power, which is the one that I most want to see selected, but may not be the smartest move from Boxen's point of view. This card means that Morena will explain her Nen ability in as much detail as Boxen wants, as many times over as it takes for Boxen to understand. And again, this is the information that I, man on the internet, crave, and I have to imagine it's probably what a more veteran Nen user would be concerned with, because once you know the ability, you can understand it, figure out ways to counter it, etc. But if I was Boxen, knowing nothing about Nen, I'm not sure if this would be the one I go for. I think I'd much rather spend my limited choices learning about Morena's purpose, as well as what could happen to me if I made certain choices. On that note, two more parent cards are the yes and no cards. These ones are delightfully simple, as selecting either will have Morena explain what happens if Boxen is left with either a yes or a no card as her final answer. So these could be quite valuable, because if you know the outcome of choosing yes or no, then it clarifies your path to, I don't know, I was going to say winning the game, but I don't think this game has a winner. However, it's also very risky to choose these cards, especially if you've already inferred that selecting either yes or no are both undesirable answers. Again, if yes or no were solid options, then there would be no point in playing the game at all, because you get those options by default when refusing to play the game in the first place. However, where things get a bit more interesting is when we examine the general question card, starting with question A. If Boxen selects this card, then she can ask Morena an unlimited amount of questions about anything except for her goals or her ability. However, Morena can only answer these questions with yes, no, or yes and no. And if you were a particularly smart player, this is probably what you would choose over the yes-no cards. Because you can ask questions like, if I select yes, will X happen to me? And you can keep going like that until you put together what would happen. But at the same time, it also takes time, and we need to be as efficient as possible with our time. Because the longer this game takes, the worse the consequences will be for both parties. Which could mean an Emperor Time kind of restriction, where every second spent playing lowers the lifespan of the players, which to someone like Morena, those would probably seem like acceptable conditions. She's not overly invested in life, whether it be hers or anyone else's, but we won't know for sure what the consequences are unless Borkson selects the power card. However, we also have access to the question B card, although this can only be chosen after question A because this makes Morena elaborate on her question A answer. So for example, let's say I select the question A card and then I go on to ask, if I choose yes, will I be manipulated by Nen? And if Morena says yes, yes you will be, then I can select the question B card and ask, well, how are you going to manipulate me? What are you going to make me do? Something like that. And with question B, Morena can answer with every word in every language instead of just yes and no. However, Borkson needs to be very careful because Morena is only able to elaborate on the final question asked during the question A round. And at the moment, it's my personal opinion that question A is the most powerful card to select because it gives you the most information if you know what questions to ask. Although I should say that Borkson herself disagrees with me on that. She says she doesn't need yes or no answers because she thinks she can read Morena's nonverbal cues. I still think this is a pretty good card though. And the final parent card is Deal. Also very good as it allows Borkson to retrieve a discarded card from the graveyard at the cost of fulfilling a quote, a small request from Morena. So firstly, it's important to note that this card does not stipulate which deck to choose from. So Borkson could use Deal to get one of her discarded answer cards back, or she could bring back one of Morena's parent cards to use again. It's very dangerous though because Borkson does have to fulfill that small request, which reminds me of the small request that Alika had people fulfill, like giving her their internal organs and such. I mean, here's a good small request. Morena could ask for a kiss, which seems fairly small if you're not aware of how her contagion ability works. And if Borkson doesn't select the power card, she probably won't find out. But there's an unlimited number of possibilities for what the small request could be. And whatever it is, I should note that Borkson does not have to fulfill the request, but in that case, the dealer card is discarded and the turn passes to Morena. So it's effectively a waste of a turn if Borkson doesn't fulfill it. And to give these turns some tangible value, Borkson has a maximum of 5 turns before she's left with one card, and that's taking into account that she chooses Deal at some point and retrieves one of her answer cards. So we're not going to see every parent card played. In fact, we'll probably end the game not seeing at least 2 of them. And my guess is that at least one of them will be one of the yes-no cards. I really cannot imagine Borkson selecting both of those at this stage, and I also feel like one of either aim or power won't be chosen, if only because I do feel like question A and question B are probably going to be used for narrative goodness and intrigue, and I really don't see selecting question A and then not moving on to question B as well, so they come as a bit of a question package. And I guess at this point we should probably talk about the request itself, because that's actually the most vague part about this game at the moment. At first it seems quite simple because Morena states at the outset that she wants Borkson to join her family and will do her best to get Borkson to join, but that's not a request. That is a statement of intent to request. But I cannot imagine that in a game with such strictly defined rules surrounding grammar that the request itself has been made yet. To go into some more things that are kind of missing from the English, you should know that Japanese is a very context-dependent language. It often deliberately omits what English speakers would consider to be incredibly important information in sentences, and Japanese relies on the context of the situation to provide clarity rather than the specific language being used. So you can see how this would become just a little bit of a problem in a situation like this, and that's why Borkson spent a ton of this chapter clarifying that. Because if you can't even agree on the subject of a sentence, then how are you supposed to respond? And one issue brought up in the original Japanese of the chapter is the word jibun, which is a tricky pronoun because it means both myself and oneself. But there's a whole ton of other words in Japanese that completely break the English mind brain because they can mean both me and you, like temai and onore. But with the way I believe that Morena explains the game, I believe that it starts with the request being made, which we'll see first thing next chapter, maybe. And it's Borkson's job to formulate a response with her available turns. But let's say the request is very straightforward, like, will you join my Haoli family? If Borkson is left with yes, then she'll be forced to join, probably through pseudo-coercive Nen. And if she says no, then there could be a punishment for rejecting. Perhaps the Haoli family will be forced to dispose of her because she knows too much. In which case, the only real out of the game would be to end up with the X card, neither joining the family nor rejecting them, and thus not having to face the consequences of that rejection. I really don't know if it would be that simple though. At the moment, the X, it just seems like the obvious answer. But knowing Togashi, there's probably a reason why you wouldn't want to not respond to this request. And I should say that the actual answer to this card game may have already been given away. In chapter 405, Morena and Gelato talk about what we now know is the card game that we're playing, and in the official translation, Morena says, "I'll try my best to make sure we get a yes." However, that is not what the literal Japanese said. In the Voracious Drake translation, Morena's dialogue says, "Let's do our best to ensure they don't say no." Now, the difference in saying yes and not saying no is pretty negligible in most situations, but definitely not this one. Because the very concept of yes, no, and no response aren't just regular words, they are game mechanics. So if the literal Japanese is most accurate, and the only answer that the Haley family do not want her to select is no, then Balkson's way out may be to select the no card, with both the yes and no response options leading to situations that Morena can work with. But what we could boil this whole experience down to is, in the end, Morena and Balkson are playing a Nen card game to decide whether or not they're going to kiss. And I am here for it. But if Morena is successful here and Balkson is recruited, then I think we might just be done. Whatever the Haley plan is, she is an integral key, and they are quite rapidly approaching a nigh on unstoppable level of power.